If you ask most people why World War I started, you'll probably get the same standard answer.
Right. It's always the rigid alliances, the unstoppable train timetables for mobilization, and then the spark.
The assassination, yeah. It's always presented as this terrible accident, a rolling stone, I think the German chancellor called it, that just got out of control.
But that whole accident theory, it really misses the bigger picture, and that's what we want to get into today.
Okay.
We're going to look at the 9 years leading up to 1914, and then the decade of attempted peace that followed. Because what you see is that leaders didn't just stumble into war.
They made choices.
Exactly. They consciously and deliberately abandoned the way diplomacy had been done for decades, the very system that had kept a general peace.
And this isn't just, an academic exercise. Understanding why that peace structure at Versailles was so flawed from the start,
Yeah?
well, it helps you understand why global stability is often so fragile today.
It really does.
So let's start with that shift, the one that defines the decade before the war. Historians talk about the erosion of the European concert. What was that exactly?
Well, for decades, it was this understanding among the great powers, a focus on cooperation, on moderation, even when they disagreed. But what our sources show is that this wasn't just a slow erosion.
It was a conscious choice.
It was a fundamental shift toward what's been called armed diplomacy.
And what does that mean in practice?
It means national interests suddenly come first, way ahead of international stability. And what's really fascinating is how a series of crises before the war set this really toxic new precedent.
Okay.
That disputes were now going to be settled by intimidation, by flexing military muscle, not by actual negotiation. And these events they built on each other.
So the first big one was the Moroccan crisis in 1905, the first really serious militarized standoff in decades.
It was. Germany challenged French influence there, and suddenly you have Britain, France, Belgium, all mobilizing reservists, strengthening defenses.
So what was the actual outcome when they all sat down at the Algeciras conference?
A complete diplomatic disaster for Germany. Just a total setback.
Because they were isolated?
Completely isolated. The only real support they got was from Austria-Hungary. And crucially, it pushed Britain and France much closer together. They started having secret military staff discussions after this.
Okay, so Germany comes out of this feeling cornered. Then, just a couple of years later, you get the Bosnian crisis of 1908.
Right, when Austria-Hungary just annexes Bosnia-Herzegovina. Russia made a lot of noise, mobilized opposition, but then they had to back down.
Why?
They were just too weak militarily, they couldn't back up their threats, and that retreat was huge. It set two things in motion. First, Russia decided it could never, ever afford another national humiliation like that.
It'd have to be tougher next time.
Much tougher. And second, Germany saw just how much Austria-Hungary now depended on its unconditional support to get anything done.
Which brings us to the second Moroccan crisis in 1911. France makes a move, and Germany sends a gunboat, the Panther.
Yes, and this was really a desperate move, an attempt to test the Anglo-French Entente to see if they could break it.
And it didn't work.
It backfired completely. The Entente stood firm, ready to defend their position. And for Berlin, this just reinforced their fear of isolation again. It convinced them that the only way out was some kind of fundamental recalibration of the balance of power.
And the final piece, right before the main event, were the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 13.
Yeah, these wars destabilized everything even further. Serbia got much bigger, much stronger. For the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, this was a disaster.
How so?
It just shifted the whole balance against them. Russia was getting stronger, Serbia was emboldened. By early 1914, the feeling in Berlin and Vienna was that they were, and this is the key phrase, encircled, isolated, and disadvantaged. The old system was broken.
So when Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated on June 28, 1914, it's not some random spark. For Vienna, it's an opportunity.
It's the opportunity they'd been waiting for, a chance for that violent solution to crush the South Slav threat once and for all.
But they could only do it with Germany's backing.
And their entire gamble hinged on that, which is where the infamous blank check comes in, issued by the Chancellor, Bethmann Hollweg, on July 6th.
So can we just clarify what that really meant? Was it literally, unconditional freedom for Vienna to do whatever it wanted?
Essentially, yes. It was carte blanche. The German leaders, they thought a quick, localized war in the Balkans could work.
To what end?
Crush Serbia, maybe weaken Russia, and perhaps even break the Entente. They critically underestimated Russia's new resolve, the one born from that humiliation in 1908.
And once Russia started to mobilize to protect Serbia, Germany's own plan kicked in.
The Schlieffen Plan. A rigid, unchangeable timetable to knock out France by invading through neutral Belgium.
And that rigidity was the fatal flaw, wasn't it?
It removed all diplomatic flexibility. I mean, it wasn't a defensive strategy, it was a preemptive strike based entirely on speed. Once you gave the order, you couldn't stop it. You couldn't scale it back.
Plus, they made another huge miscalculation.
A fatal one. They thought Britain would stay neutral.
But the invasion of neutral Belgium on August 4th made that impossible. That single act brought Britain into the war.
And just like that, a regional crisis became a world war.
The fighting almost immediately bogged down into what historians call a triple stalemate. What does that mean?
It was a total deadlock. Militarily, on the battlefield, diplomatically, because no one would talk, and even on the home fronts. The war transformed almost overnight into industrialized total war.
And that transformation meant the goals of the war changed, right?
They became much bigger.
They became maximum war aims. Germany wanted dominance in Europe. The Allies wanted Germany completely weakened. Compromise was impossible.
But to get your population to commit to that kind of slaughter, you need something more. You need a culture that's already in some way prepared for it. Which brings us to this idea of spy fever.
Yeah, it's often said that a culture of militarism caused the war, that men were just yearning for it.
Which seems unlikely. I think yearning for industrial slaughter is doubtful, yes, but there was absolutely a cultural preparation happening, and this spy fever is the perfect example. It was this obsession in popular culture from about 1899 to 1913 with fictional stories of a coming Anglo-German war.
And the details in our sources here are just incredible. It started with a book called The Spies of White in 1899.
And then you get Erskine Childers' famous novel, The Riddle of the Sands, in 1903. It described these fleets of German lighters packed with soldiers ready to invade England.
But the real peak was William Le Queux's The Invasion of 1910.
Which was serialized in the Daily Mail newspaper, a huge bestseller. And it wasn't just about ships and armies, it tapped into a much deeper fear.
The enemy within.
Exactly. The idea that German immigrants were already here, acting as spies as a pre-invasion force.
There's a specific detail from a 1905 novel, A Maker of History, that is so telling. The fictional head of German intelligence says there are 290,000 German clerks, waiters, and hairdressers in Britain.
All of whom have done their military service, all of whom can shoot and are ready to attack the forts from the inside. That kind of paranoia, it's a powerful psychological accelerant.
And that paranoia feeds right into the debate after the war about who was responsible. Was Germany solely to blame?
Well, the most famous argument for that came from the historian Fritz Fischer in the 1960s. He argued Germany was aggressively expansionist, and that 1914 was the final step in a premeditated grab for world power.
A Griff nach der Weltmacht.
Exactly. He said it was also intended to protect Germany's autocratic system at home from democratic reforms.
But hold on. Newer research seems to suggest Germany was acting aggressively out of fear, from a sense of its deteriorating position. How can both be true? How can you be aggressive out of weakness?
And that is the nuance that later historians brought in. They argued that Germany's calculated risk in 1914 didn't come from some supreme confidence. It came from a place of desperation.
So they felt they were losing ground.
Precisely. They felt time was running out, and they had to act aggressively to reverse their decline within a failing system.
Let's move ahead to 1917. The stalemate is total, and it creates an opening for radical new ideas about how to end the war.
Right, and you really see two competing visions emerge. You have Lenin's revolutionary solution, and you have President Wilson's liberal reform.
Lenin seized power with the slogan, peace, land, and bread. What was his vision for peace?
He believed monopoly capitalism caused the war, and that only a revolution of the working class could end it. His immediate result was the very harsh Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, which he just saw as a temporary setback until the World Revolution came.
And on the other side, you have Wilson and his 14 points.
Yes, his new diplomacy. The key ideas were things like open treaties, self-determination for national groups, and of course the big one, the League of Nations.
Now, this is crucial for what happens next in Germany, isn't it?
It is. The German military leadership, specifically Ludendorff, sought peace based on Wilson's moderate terms. But right before surrendering, he handed power to a new civilian government.
Why? What was the motive there?
It allowed the right wing in Germany to create a powerful and dangerous myth that the army was never defeated but was stabbed in the back by an internal revolution. It covered up the military's failure.
So that leads us to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, dominated by the Council of Four Wilson, Lloyd George, Clemenceau, Orlando. And Germany faced very harsh terms.
Punitive terms, territorial losses, demilitarization, and the most famous part, reparations.
And the way reparations were handled is a huge paradox.
A profound one. Everyone agreed Germany should pay, but no one could agree on how much or how they possibly could. So the peacemakers wrote in two articles, 231 and 232, to try and solve this.
Okay, and Article 231 is the infamous war guilt clause. But wait, you're saying his purpose wasn't actually to punish them financially, but to help them. That sounds completely backward.
It does, but that was the technical intent. Article 231 established Germany's theoretical responsibility for the entire cost of the war, which satisfied the Allies politically.
Right.
But then Article 232 immediately limited their actual liability to only specific civilian damages, a much, much smaller amount. The idea was to protect Germany from total economic ruin.
But that's not how it was seen at all.
Not at all. Politically, everyone just focused on the war guilt part of 231, and it became the foundation for decades of German resentment, even though the legal architecture was, ironically, designed to prevent an economic catastrophe.
Meanwhile, France was terrified. They still had a powerful Germany right on their border.
And their top general, Foch, demanded the Rhineland as a permanent buffer zone. But Wilson and Lloyd George refused. They feared it would just create a new source of conflict for the future.
So instead, they offered France a deal.
They offered Anglo-American treaties of guarantee, a promise to defend France against any future German aggression. For Clemenceau, this was the keystone of European peace.
But the keystone crumbled almost immediately.
It did. The U.S. Senate rejected the entire Versailles Treaty in November 1919, and the guarantees just evaporated.
And Wilson made things worse in another way, didn't he?
He did, through his financial approach. The U.S. was the world's biggest creditor, but he took this very moralistic stance. He refused to combine war debts, reparations, and reconstruction into one big package.
He insisted Germany had to pay its penance.
Exactly. And that left France totally exposed, relying on a treaty that basically depended on Germany choosing to comply.
It's not until the mid-1920s that we see real attempts to stabilize things.
Finally, yes. You get the Dawes Plan in 1924, which was crucial. It brought in American loans, scaled down the payments, and linked them to German compliance. It was the first real use of U.S. financial power to try and fix Europe.
And then the Locarno Treaties in 1925.
Which formalized the Franco-German border and demilitarized the Rhineland. It was a sign that Germany was slowly being brought back into the system. For a short time, it really felt like peace might actually hold.
Just for a moment.
Just for a moment. But that whole Locarno equilibrium was incredibly fragile. It was completely dependent on the global economy staying strong.
And then came 1929.
And the global economic crisis just shattered everything. Protectionism, a total lack of coordination. It proved that the entire post-war settlement was, as one source puts it, contingent, incomplete, and highly sensitive to both domestic and international shocks.
So at the end of the day, the road to the war was paved by this deliberate move to armed diplomacy.
And the peace that followed was just fundamentally flawed, hobbled by infighting, failed promises, and a kind of economic moralism that prevented practical solutions. It was a structure built on sand.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. Think about the huge difference between diplomatic intent and political execution. The original technical purpose of Articles 231 and 232 was, bizarrely, to protect Germany from economic disaster. Yet the political interpretation of those articles was immediately weaponized, becoming the fuel for decades of resentment. So ask yourself, what other diplomatic compromises today intended for stability might be misinterpreted or weaponized by politicians tomorrow?